Today's guest is a highly trained psychotherapist, hypnotherapist, and regression therapist. She studies past lives, alien abductions, and crop circles. All exciting topics that I'm dying to get into. Let's give a massive Koit welcome to Barbara Lamb. KoitCast! Hello there, Barbara, and welcome to KoitCast. Pleasure to have you here. I suppose my first question will be, what has been your path in life? I mean, what has led you to this point?
Okay, well, all of my life, ever since being a little girl, I just wanted to be helpful to people somehow, and I didn't know how I was going to do that. So I got older and went to college and graduated, and still didn't know. I knew I didn't want to just work for a corporation, and I didn't want to be a social worker or a nurse or a doctor or a clergy person. So I, just didn't know. I had to sort of put that off for a while. Anyway, eventually I got married and had 3 children, and was busy in those years and got very involved in movement therapy, became a dance therapist.
Oh, nice.
For about 13 years. That was wonderful, wonderful, very enjoyable work. And brought that work to a lot of conferences where, in the beginning stage of the conference, or maybe in some of the breaks, they would ask me to do movement work with people in the audience, those who were willing. Most of them were willing. And anyway, that was a therapeutic modality, it turned out to be. And also in the 1970s, I was doing a lot of learning about counseling skills and had the opportunity to have some training for that, and absolutely loved it and felt dedicated to that. So in the mid 1970s, I went back to graduate school, got a master's degree, and then did all the things that have to be done to qualify for being licensed as a therapist, and did that by 1976. So then, for the next several years, I was doing, pretty traditional psychotherapy, counseling with people. And I noticed that sometimes I was taking people into what I call deeper states of relaxation, deeper states of consciousness, and that sometimes they would remember things or process things, process things. And it seemed to be very therapeutically helpful. Also, I was doing a lot of traveling to other countries in the early 1980s. And in 2 of those countries, one was Peru, one was Egypt, I had what I later called spontaneous past life recalls. In other words, I'd be in a certain location in one of those countries, and suddenly this great big memory would come up. It didn't seem like imagination or a fantasy. It seemed like something I was really remembering from a previous life. Because in these memories, I was a different person. I might have been a male in some of them. I might have been a child. I might have been a white person. I might have been an Egyptian person, a Peruvian person. So, at first it didn't make sense, because at that point in my life, 1980, 81, 82, I had no reason to think that there were any past lives. I didn't know that we lived many, many, many lifetimes. So these things were sort of puzzling to me, but they were very powerful. And in many cases, they were quite wonderful of what I realized I was doing in those previous lifetimes. One of them was extremely traumatic, tragic, sad. And I had to, that was in Egypt, in a certain location, and I had to process that for a couple of hours. I just told my traveling companions to just, be somewhere else, please. I needed to be alone in my room and process this. And I cried and sobbed for 2 hours. So I knew that there's got to be some reality to this, or why would I currently so much emotion? So anyway, that certainly brought my attention to past lives and to the ability to go back and recover all the details, the important details of a previous life. So I was thinking, here I was doing my regular therapy work.
Yeah.
And thinking that, there must be some way that this could be used therapeutically with other people who would be willing to open up to where the source of their problem comes from.
Yeah.
And then in 1984, I met the woman who had founded the Association for Past Life Research and Therapies. And that organization, was amazing. I hadn't known there was such a thing. And anyway, it was only, the headquarters were 45 minutes only from my home. So I thought, well, this is serendipitous. And that woman who had founded that organization of professional psychotherapists, she invited me to their conference, which synchronistically was just going to happen the very next evening, only an hour away from where I lived in Southern California. So I went to the conference thinking I would just get a taste of it on Friday night. And I stayed for the whole weekend.
That's
because
good.
I was so impressed with these therapists themselves. There were probably at least 100 of them from all over the United States, as well as all over California. A couple of them even were from Europe. And I just was so impressed with them and with the work that they were doing. And they even at one point guided us through a past life regression, and something very interesting came up for me from a previous lifetime. So anyway, at the end of that conference, they were mentioning that they were starting their training program to train people in conducting past life regression therapy. And it was going to start in a couple of weeks. And again, it was close to my home. The training was going to happen in the very next town.
It's amazing considering how big America is that all this is local to you, relatively, Yeah.
Absolutely. Because here I was just opening up with great interest to this area and wanting to know more and more about it. And the training was right nearby, everything. I just thought, oh, well, this is perfect. This is meant to be for me. So, of course, I started that training in 1984, and I had 5 years of that past life therapy training and doing regressions and having a lot of regressions done on me. And in some of those regressions, not all of them by any means. And by the way, I was starting to do regressions with some of my therapy clients when it seemed appropriate.
Appropriate, yeah, sure.
To get back to the source of some difficulty that they were having. And we sort of couldn't attribute it to any this life experience. So once in a while, I would suggest that that person would do a regression. And of course, they had to be willing. And if they were willing to do it, I conducted a regression and found really amazing results in that way back. It could have been hundreds of years ago, or even thousands, in some of these regressions, that whatever the dramatic thing was or the main feature that happened in that lifetime definitely appears to have an effect in this lifetime. So if we can know about it from the past and sort of clear it up, let it go, and I do a process to help the person to sort of clear that out and go on with in this life without it. It turned out to be very, very helpful for those people. So in 1991, here I was doing quite a bit of this regression therapy work in my counseling practice. And then in 1991, I met a woman who somehow recognized that I was doing regression work and asked me to work with her daughter, her 21-year-old daughter, who was highly traumatized because she was having very unusual beings who were not human, not anything she recognized or could identify, that they were coming into her room at night and seeming to take her out of bed and take her away. And sometimes they would even appear in the daytime. So she was so confused and actually traumatized by this. And nobody she knew, including her parents, knew anything about this. So they didn't know what to do to help her. So anyway, I did 6 regressions with her. And then after the 6th, she came in and said, "Oh, I just feel so much better about this whole thing. And my boyfriend and I are going to move away from my parents, and we're going to move to a little cottage, a little cabin in the wilderness behind our towns in Southern California." And I said, "Well, with your being in the wilderness, seems like it might be a good chance that some of these unusual beings will be coming again." And she said, "Yes, I know that. And so does my boyfriend. And we're okay with that." So in the meantime, she had actually, before her saying that, she had actually been healed of really fierce ear infection at home in bed, in her own bed. And also she had been healed in the daytime with her sister witnessing this. She was healed by a big blue beam of light coming from a shiny round craft up in the sky.
Whoa.
So they both were witnesses to this big beam of light hitting her in her back and healing lower back pain that she had had for a year or two. And no matter what she had done, it just wasn't going away. But this beam of light took the pain away and healed up whatever that condition was. So that had happened before she came in for that last session, when she just seemed so relaxed about it and even happy about it and grateful for it. And she had gotten used to the fact that by then that she was having encounters with these unusual beings, which we then began to call extraterrestrial beings. Yeah. So this was 1991, and there wasn't a whole lot of information out about these things. I had heard a couple of speakers at a big forum where there were lots of speakers. I had heard 2 of them giving lectures about people who were having these encounters. They tended to call them abductions.
Yeah.
So in the meantime, before that first client came, I had heard that there were at least a couple of other people working with people about this sort of subject. And I had decided one day when I was having a shower, nice free thought time. And I love that time because
me too, to be fair.
This goes wherever it wants to go.
Yeah.
I found myself thinking, these other 2 speakers I've heard are doing regression work with people who've had these extraterrestrial encounters. And I haven't worked with people who've had those, but I've done lots of regressions now in the last several years. And I'm very, very comfortable with that process, very experienced. And so if anybody ever should happen to come to me for that reason, because these strange beings had been visiting, then yeah, I could do that. I could use the same regression therapy methods, just putting it to this subject instead of going into a past life. We could just go back into one of these experiences. So, as it happened synchronistically, after I had thought that thought in the shower that morning, I went to a bookstore, a metaphysical bookstore, and the woman behind the counter recognized me somehow, knew that I did regression therapy. I don't know how she knew that, but anyway, she asked if I would work with her daughter, the one I've just been mentioning,
Yeah.
who was so traumatized. So that was the beginning. And after working with her, and it seemed to be so extremely helpful for her, then I thought, well, if anybody ever comes for that kind of reason, I know that I can work effectively with that. I can manage it. And I didn't particularly think anybody else would ever come for that reason, but they did. It was a few months later that another woman was referred to me, and we started doing regressions to her extraterrestrial encounters. And then another lady, in other words, there were about 5 people that one year, 1991, that came to me, and each one did at least 2 or maybe 3 regressions to separate extraterrestrial encounters. So that was sort of the beginning. And I felt very welcoming if anybody else would come, because I had experienced with these people that it was so helpful to them, so meaningful. And that's the main point. It had also been very interesting for me. I was learning a lot with each regression that I did, and became more and more fascinated with the whole topic of other beings in space and what they know about us, and those who come to us and what they do, what they have us do. And certainly over a very short period of time, developed the awareness that there are many, many, many different kinds of beings out there, very intelligent beings, and they have the ability to come here and take people with them for a while. Usually they would take somebody to their own spaceship, UFO, and sometimes would even take the person to another planet. And I found out over time that sometimes they could take a person to what certainly seemed to be a past life as one of those beings living on a different planet. So that began to open up the subject even further. And in all of these years since 1991, that's a lot of years now, quite a number of people have found in this regression work that in previous lifetimes they were an extraterrestrial themselves, living on a different planet and doing different work. Of course, a whole different culture, whole different society that they were part of. And is that some of the regressions were spontaneously going back to visiting previous lifetimes as an extraterrestrial. So that opened up things even more for me.
I was going to say, that's a huge world you've entered into. Now,
yes,
there's
incredible.
a lot we have to unpack there. So let's first off, I want to say this, right? Which is, you're probably one of the only people I've ever heard say you didn't know what you wanted to do in your life, right? I was very similar. I didn't know what to do for ages, and then you find yourself in a job that doesn't really fulfill you.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm not wishing pain on you for going through the same experience, but it's nice to know that somebody else also went through the path I did in that respect. So that's the first thing.
Excuse me, I would
Yes.
like to add that many, many people have come to me over the years. I mean, I've done several thousand regressions
Yeah.
just since 1991. So many people, and most of the people who have been coming to me all these years have been coming for this life experiences rather than for past life, although
Yeah.
sometimes a past life will come up spontaneously in the regression. But anyway, many of these people who have come feel the same way that you did and I did, that we sort of felt that we were here for some purpose, not just sort of the everyday purpose, everyday job,
Mm.
everyday living and so forth, everyday people in our lives, but we felt that we're here to contribute something special. And I just didn't know what it was. And it sort of bothered me all of those years. I just, well, after college, I had a couple of different jobs, one after the other, and they were very, very interesting to me, very interesting in this world. And then I quit to have my children, raise the children. But anyway, even in those jobs, which were very interesting, I kind of felt like, well, I'm helping to some extent by doing what I was doing in those jobs, but but I just feel there's something else, and
Mm.
that I'm supposed to be doing and didn't know what that was. So I think there are lots of us like that, and also many people are nowadays, especially for the past couple of years, more and more people have been coming saying, I just want to find out why I am really here in life, what my purpose is. I feel like I have a purpose and I don't really know what it is. And in some cases, it turns out in the regression, going back to a person's soul purpose, their soul wisdom in that regression, we find out that the person is already doing some of what they came to do. In other words, they might be having a regular job, and also on the side, occasionally, they might be doing healing work,
Sure, sure.
kind or other. And but they're still, mostly focused on their job, and as we need to do, when we're
Yeah.
earning a and yet they still have this feeling, I don't know if I'm doing what I really came to do. So these regressions show people what their real soul purpose is for this lifetime. And as I said, sometimes they realize that they're already doing that part-time, or they have been beginning to learn how to develop the skills to fulfill that purpose. So that's wonderful. People are very happy when they realize that. And sometimes they discover in the regression, that their purpose is a whole other thing that they hadn't really even considered. But now that they know about that, they know where they can take further steps to develop the ability to carry out that purpose. Like, for instance, they might discover that they have um, a lot spontaneous psychic abilities, and they might recognize that that is the purpose, to use that in a particular way for good, for the
Mm.
sake of human life and animal life in many cases. And so they then become dedicated to getting more training in using the psychic ability they already have, or they may have been sort of dabbling just with friends or family in doing physical healing. And then when they hear that from their own regression, that their purpose is to be a healer, then they may decide to go and get further training in healing modalities so they can do that more effectively and eventually do that full time. So sometimes people will actually change their careers because of what they have found out in a regression about their true soul purpose. So I have a lot of women coming for that reason, and a few men too, who are, very busy in a career, climbing up the ladder or having their own business and raising a family, raising children. And yet they may, in their 50s or 60s or so, may think, I just have the feeling that I'm here for some purpose and I haven't even gotten to it yet. And I better do it while there's still years ahead.
Well, there's still time, exactly, yeah.
So they will come too. So I think that's wonderful. But most of the people who are coming to me and have been for all of these years are coming because they've had very unusual experiences. They may not think of them necessarily yet as extraterrestrial, but there have been some peculiar things that have happened, or with some people, they have had a recurring dream. Now, just yesterday, I had a wonderful woman who came to me for a regression, and the presenting subject was that she had been having recurring dreams for many, many years in her adult life. And it was basically the same dream. And so we always wonder about recurring dreams. We therapists do, because there's got to be some reason why that same theme from the subconscious part of the person's mind would keep presenting the same scenario over and over again for the person to be aware of in the dream, from the dream.
Yeah, sure.
So I take those recurring dreams seriously. They're really worth taking a good, deeper look at. And what she found was that what she kept dreaming, which seemed to be totally human and in a human situation, turned out to be that she was taken to an extraterrestrial craft. And to her surprise and my surprise, conducting this and hearing her describe what she was experiencing in the regression, the beings, extraterrestrial beings there, who all very engaged, very busy doing whatever their work was, but that they noticed her there walking amongst them, and they were perfectly okay with that, like she was a regular person who went there. And gradually she realized that she had been there many, many times on this particular spacecraft with these beings who definitely were not human beings. And she went over and talked to one, and he showed her a new apparatus, a new machine that was attached to the wall in that spacecraft. And he said, this is our newest frequency machine. And you, the human, you are to know about this and incorporate some of this in your work. So it turned out that she is a woman who in her work does some energy healing. That's not her main job, but she does some with people she knows, and they seem to appreciate it very much. And so she realized, from this regression and more details that I'm not mentioning, that she had been trained by them, and now and then would go to that place, to that spacecraft, and get new methods of training. And this was one of those new methods that the being, a male being, was encouraging her to not bring back the machine, but bring back the frequencies that machine emitted, to sort of absorb them in her, and then she would be able to give those frequencies out in her healing of people here on Earth. So that was a big surprise, and that all came from her mentioning the recurring dream. In the recurring
Yeah.
dream, she had found herself in an elevator with other people, and the elevator would go up and up and up and up and up and up and up, seeming to be a very, very high level. And then she would get out, excuse me, and walk around and walk into a structure. She said we're really up high in the sky, and it seems like, oh, maybe we're in the top of a very tall skyscraper. I don't
Okay.
know.
Sure.
Yeah, but anyway, she walked around from the elevator, open door, into a structure. So later we thought, okay, she's been taken up in the air. She's going into a craft. And anyway, the interior certainly seemed like a round spacecraft with these other beings and other human beings. They're being examined and being healed. So that reminds me to say
Yeah.
that there is a lot of healing of human beings that some of the extraterrestrials do. I've had people in regressions with many, many different kinds of beings, and some sort of healing is going on of them. Now, from the superficial look at it, it might look like, oh, this is not really a very pleasant experience. In other words, the person finds himself or herself lying on a hard table with these very unusual beings all around, and a strange environment that they don't recognize. Lots of light, usually. Sometimes they can see that the walls are curved, no windows. It's all very light. They don't know where the light is coming from, but it is very light, and that they are being examined, and sometimes by these unusual beings. And sometimes they realize that they're actually being physically healed of some condition that they have had. In some cases, they didn't even know that they had a problem, let's say with their pancreas or their liver, or
Yeah.
what
Okay.
system of the body. And yet the beings, in examining this person, have detected that this person has a problem with one of these systems or one of these organs, and either will go ahead and heal it right then and there, usually with some form of light, or they will tell the person to be sure to tell their doctor when they're back home on Earth, tell their doctor to check that particular organ and to see if it's doing all right, because they, the beings, have detected that there's a serious problem there. So they'll either warn the person to get medical help at home with that, or they will go ahead and heal it. In most cases where there's been that sort of thing going on, it seems like they just go right ahead and heal it. They don't even mention it to the person who might be completely out of consciousness or might be aware to some extent. And when the person is aware in the regression, and I will say, would you like to know what the beings are doing to you? And the
Yeah.
person usually does want to know, they're just lying there on the table and all these things are happening. And I say, well, you can ask them what they're doing, and they will probably tell you, so that you can ask with your mind alone, or you can ask out loud as you wish. So most of the people I've done this with in regression have just asked silently in their minds. And then they say, oh, now they're saying, oh, yeah, I have a problem with my colon, and they're healing that. That's what they're doing. And that if they didn't heal it, they're saying it would be a big problem for me. It hasn't been a big problem yet, but it will be unless they take care of it. So they are taking care of it. So, things like that make you think that some of these beings are very, very altruistic, very benevolent, no matter what they look like. Uh, and they really do a lot of things to help people.
Yeah, that's what Preston has been saying to me, that
It's,
he wholeheartedly believes it's all altruistic and for the benefit of humanity. And I'm probably on that bandwagon. There are some people out there like your Daryl Sims or whatever who will say it's all negative. And I don't really want to go into the negativity because I don't actually believe that. But I do want to understand agendas of sorts, because I think that's an answer I think we all crave. But
yes.
before we go there, I have a couple of questions, because obviously you went through a lot there. I have a couple of questions. So the first one was pertaining to your early days when you said you had one person who came with the UFO experience, and then you had another, and another, and another. Were they word of mouth by that first person, or were they 5 people like randomly coming with the same experience?
Well, it certainly seemed random. And I'm not quite sure how it happened. So the first one, as I mentioned, the young woman was referred by her mother, who somehow, I never have found out how, somehow knew that I, just coming in to buy some books, and I didn't know her, but somehow she recognized me from somewhere. It was a beautiful synchronicity. I have no idea how she knew who I was by name and that I was a regression therapist. So that happened, and that's a mystery I'll probably always live with. How did she know that about me? Because, because I had not done that work yet, and I was not even advertising anywhere that I was doing regression work. So how she knew that, I don't know, but God bless it. It
Yeah.
happened. That was wonderful. So then I think the next person who came a few months later was referred by a woman I know who did know that I was doing regression work. And she knew another woman who was giving hints to her about, maybe some of these extraterrestrial encounters are happening, just from what that woman was describing. So she referred that woman to me to do regression work to see what these peculiar things were all about that were happening to her. And then the third person, too, I think it was some kind of referral from somebody who knew I did regression work, but I certainly had no reputation at that point in time for doing extraterrestrial regression. But so that was 1991. I think by 1992, by the winter, I found that a person I knew was asking me to give a lecture at the Jung Society, Carl Jung, Society, and in our town. And she knew me. We were not really good friends yet, but she knew me and knew that I was interested in a lot of unusual subjects and that I was doing regression work. So she invited me to give a lecture to that group. It was probably a group of about maybe 40 people, 50 at the most. And anyway, then after that, one of those people in the audience said, "Oh, I know a group in Los Angeles." We were about 30 miles east of Los Angeles. And she said, "I know a group in Los Angeles that would really like to hear from you." I was also at that time becoming very, very involved with crop circles.
Yeah, so I want to ask you a lot about that later on, actually.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah.
very interesting one again.
So that person at the Jung Society said that she knew a group in Los Angeles that had formed itself as the Center for Crop Circle Studies, Los Angeles. And so she said, you really ought to meet them, and they ought to meet you, because you're going to England. You have been there in them. You've been really studying them, and you know a lot of the English crop circle researchers. So anyway, I then got involved with that group, and some of those people in that group had wondered about peculiar experiences that they had had. Maybe they were extraterrestrial, they weren't sure. And so a person or two from that group started coming to me, and then, the word just kind of gets around.
Yeah,
And
snowballs from there, I assume.
yeah, and then I got a call from a MUFON group, Mutual UFO Network group, and they said, "I hear that you're doing work with crop circles. Would you come and give us a lecture?" And I did that. So that was about 1992, I think. And then at the end of that lecture, I just happened to mention, because I thought, people who regularly come to this Mutual UFO Network group, there might be some of them who experience extraterrestrial encounters. Maybe not. Maybe most of them don't, but maybe there's somebody who does. So I just very, very briefly mentioned at the end of that crop circle lecture that I also do regression work to help people to know about their experiences that they've had with extraterrestrial beings or any other kind of unusual beings. And that's all I said. And then the lecture was over. And then a woman came up to me in the social time and just saying, I am so taken by what you said about the work that you do, and I would really like to come and do some regression work with you. And she did. And then, of course, she mentioned it to other people. And, one thing leads to another. And I was asked to give more lectures and realized that, there was a point for my mentioning that I do this regression work, because there might be somebody in this audience who could really benefit from that. Maybe most of them wouldn't relate to it, but in case there is somebody, and somebody usually did come forward from my lectures or contact me later and say that they wanted to do some regression work with me too. So by 1994, after doing 3 years of this work, I was sort of realizing one day, I have 17 different people from around the Los Angeles area who are coming to me for regressions for these experiences that they've had that certainly seem to be extraterrestrial encounters. And so there's 17 of them. That's quite a lot. And all of those people were coming for more than one session. In other words, they'd have one regression, let's say in November, and they'd sort of digest that and get used to that. And then they might come back in January or June, or, so there were these 17 people who were coming every few months or so, or in some cases more frequently, for regression to find out more and more. Because what we learned early on is that if a person has one encounter of that sort with extraterrestrial beings, it means it has turned out so far that they've had numerous other experiences of the same type, usually with the same beings, or maybe even with different beings who have totally different agendas. So a lot of people who would come realizing that they'd had a recent experience that was very vividly in mind, or the beginning of it anyway was very vividly in mind, and that when we would be doing that regression, it would suddenly trigger, during the regression, would trigger memories of their having been with those particular beings earlier in their life, or they'd suddenly remember an experience that happened that they'd always wondered about from age 5 or 6 or 3 or 2. And so with one of these men who was coming for a series of these regressions over a period of a few years, we went to the earliest experience in his life that he had had one of these encounters. And what came out in that regression was that he was a fetus developing in his mother's womb when a being came and did healing on him through
In the womb.
Yeah, he didn't have to
Whoa.
reach into the womb. He just put his hands over the mother's abdomen, and the fetus could feel that heat and that warmth coming to him, and the being explained why he was doing that. Turned out that that man continued to have encounters with that same being every year or so through all of his childhood and growing up years, and even his adult years. And by his adult years, he was also having experiences with other species of extraterrestrials, who had different programs, different agendas in mind. But there was always this running thread of this one particular being whom he recognized each time as the same being and felt very friendly with, because that being was, after all, helping him. This man had a hole in his heart, and the being knew that from wherever that being resides. He knew that his fetus had a hole in his heart, and that he would not live after being born. He would not live very long at all, because the heart would be bleeding. And so he came to fix that before the baby was even born. And all of these subsequent visits with that particular being were for refurbishing that healing over the hole in his heart. So he lived to be, he grew to be a big 6'4" sturdy, husky man doing physical work for most of his vocational years, and lived a really good, very active life, having been saved, we certainly believe, by this.
Which tells you, doesn't it, from that scenario there, that it's almost like, look, you're going to have a plan. Your life is planned out from now through to. Because if he didn't have a purpose, why save him? Which leads me to this question for you, which is, do you think the path you took in life was a series of choices, or was it laid out for you already, do you believe?
Well, that is a good question. And so it's just an impression that I have that I think my soul, before coming into this life, I think my soul knew that it was a time coming when we humans would know more about this, and that I would be one of the ones to help bring out more about this part of reality. And that's why I think earlier in my life, when I had, going through school and having regular jobs, and even being parents of young children, I always felt that there's something more that I should be doing. I was having a very busy life through all of those years, including the childhood raising years. And I had the feeling that there was something more that I was to be doing, and I had no idea what it was. I just knew that it had the overall component of needing to be helpful somehow to other people. So maybe it was even more specifically in my soul plan, I really don't know, to be doing this kind of work. But it feels so right to me. Since I've been doing this, I have felt that enormous feeling of gratitude that, I'm finally doing what I came to do.
Yeah.
So I feel that I'm very blessed in that way, because many, many people never experience finding that for themselves, what they're really
Very true. Very
doing.
true. I've been through it myself. I worked in a couple of jobs up until I was 27, 29, something like that. And I never felt fulfilled ever. And then a period in my life where I had some sort of like anxiety, depression, it kicked me out of that job and then put me on a different path. And then I found what I would consider my path, which is creativity. And then this avenue for me, which is the intellectual side of things and the yearning for answers. And now I feel the same thing that you mentioned, which is, yes, I'm meant to be.
I would like to ask you a question.
Sure.
With what you're doing now with these broadcasts, seems to me that is a huge service that you are doing, letting many, many other people know about these aspects from your speakers and from you too, your comments. So do you feel that this is part of your path too, to be educating people?
Yes, and I'm going to say this in a way that makes me sound like I'm big-headed or something, but I 100% am humble and don't think this way.
Okay.
I know I'm intelligent, right? And I just need an outlet for that to go, an area where I can aim it that is of use for me and others. Because I can't heal people or anything like that, and I'm not of that persuasion like you are, where you're attracted to that side of things. I'm attracted to the intellectual and the yearning and creativity. So yes, I found my direction.
Good.
And so I think the learning here is it's what I said to you earlier about the job. I didn't know what I wanted to do for ages. When we're talking 30 years. So if you're out there listening to this and you're not on the path that you think is fulfilling, trust me, it will come at some stage, and just bear with. That's all I would say. It's coming, isn't it?
Oh, good for you. And I would like to add to that. There are others. This is not an original thought, but I think the key here is recognizing what you are really interested in, what you are excited about.
Yes.
Follow that, as Bashar, the entity who gets channeled through Daryl Anka, he has said many times, follow your excitement. That will lead you into what you will consider success. That will lead you into fulfillment. So don't overlook those subjects or those things that really excite you, because that may be what your life path is to follow, be fulfilled by. Another person who brought out that idea was the mythologist Joseph Campbell.
I was talking about Joseph Campbell earlier, funnily enough, with another interviewee I was speaking to. Very interesting.
Right. And he had the phrase, follow your bliss. It's this idea, follow your bliss, follow your excitement. Notice what really gets you going. So in my case, in regard to the crop circles and the extraterrestrials, with the crop circles, I was at a big lecture forum, used to be called the Whole Life Expo, where there were many, many speakers and a big program guide. And I noticed in the program guide that there was, instead of the picture of the speaker, it was a picture of a funny little pattern. I didn't understand what that was. And the title of that lecture was something like Mysterious Patterns in the Fields of Britain. And when I saw that funny little picture, which turned out to be a crop circle, although I didn't know it at the time, when I saw that little picture and read that title, Mysterious Patterns Appearing in the Fields of Britain, I just went, whoa! I just felt full of a burst of light. And the thought was, and this was 1990, before my first extraterrestrial client ever came, or client for extraterrestrial purposes. My immediate thought with this big feeling of a burst of light was, we're being communicated with by those out there. Now, where did that come from? But anyway, that was my total realization. I remember that moment vividly, even though it happened in 1990. So anyway, I went to that lecture and saw photos of the crop circles that had happened up till that time through the summer of 1990, and saw videotapes of one or two of the crop circles, walking through the crop circles. And halfway through that lecture, I found myself slapping my thigh and saying, that's it. I'm going to England next summer to experience this myself, which I did also in 1991. And that began 27 years of going to England every summer to visit, study, research, experience the crop circles.
Well, where did you go? Wiltshire, I assume, is it?
Yes, Wiltshire County,
Yeah.
Alton Barnes area, right in the heart of crop circle territory. And you know, that phenomenon is still going on.
Mm-hmm.
Here we are now, very late July, and there probably is a new one could be happening even right now.
It's raining constantly this month, so I don't know. But here's the thing. Here's a question for you. Here's a question for you on the excitement thing you just mentioned, which is interesting. Do you have more excitement for crop circles, past lives, or the aliens side of things, or is it all equal for you, all interesting?
Well, I think it's pretty equal between the crop circles and the extraterrestrials. At this point, even I'm a bit more excited about the extraterrestrials because I keep doing these regressions year round, almost every day of every week.
Whoa.
I'm doing regression.
How big then? Sorry to interrupt there. How big then do you think this puzzle is? Because obviously, if you're seeing a lot of people, and from what all the other interviews I've done, it seems such a massive phenomenon.
Right.
How big do you think it is?
You know, back in 1991, there was a Roper poll. So these are pretty early days, at least in my awareness.
Yeah.
There was a Roper poll done of people who experience extraterrestrial encounters. And it was determined that there were 5 million Americans and people all over the world as well. And then in 1999, there was another poll, not a Roper poll, but one of the other big polling agencies. And they determined that there were 8 million American people who have these extraterrestrial encounters, as well as it happening all over the world. So I don't know what the numbers would be now. And but there are a lot of people. And a lot of people don't even know that they're having these encounters, although when you really think about it with a person, they might have had some hints about this having happened, but they don't recognize what the hints might mean, might indicate. For instance, many people will say, oh yeah, sometimes even as a young child, they'd wake up and it would seem like there's somebody else in the room, but they wouldn't be aware of it for very long, maybe only a couple of seconds, or it might look like a little man or a little monster or a bigger somebody looking down at me in the crib. Just kind of vague descriptions, or people would remember that they used to, or even still do, see little lights flying around in the room, like little orb like flying around, and or bright light coming in through the window, or they remember that sometime during the years that they would wake up and just kind of feel like somebody was there, but maybe not even ever opening their eyes, just not liking that, and then seeming to go back to sleep again. And so they're little hint, or, sometimes people will be having missing time for an hour or two. They might be out driving, and suddenly the car motor kind of comes toward a stop and they pull off the road. They may or not be aware to see that there's a big light coming toward them, maybe even close to the ground or on the ground, and that beings are coming toward them, taking them out of the car, taking them onto that craft for an hour or so. Sometimes they're aware just that the car motor seems to be dying, and they're trying to pull it off the road to be safe because it sounds like the motor's going to stop. And that may be all that they're aware of, but they might very well realize that there's been an hour or two of time that suddenly seem to have gone by. Many, many people, in fact, talk about incidents where they had a missing hour or two of time that they just can't explain, and that may very well have been one of these encounters with the extraterrestrials. We wouldn't really know that, I think, until we do the regression and see what happened during that missing time. And then, of course, many people are puzzled because every once in a while they'll wake up and they'll realize that there's a little lump somewhere under their skin, might be their arm, their leg, behind their ear, behind the neck, in the neck, almost anywhere on the body, or there might be some unusual markings, like typical ones are little markings that look like a pinprick, a little pink pinprick mark. And usually those marks are in an absolutely straight line for an inch or so, or they might be dotted around in a perfect circle or a perfect triangle shape, or it might be a bruise in a particular shape, like a total circle or a triangular shape, or they might see a little scoop mark. Looks like there's been a little instrument that scooped out some of their skin down to that very innermost layer of skin so it doesn't bleed. But in other words, there's a little indentation in their flesh that might be in their arm, their leg, their stomach, almost anywhere.
I'm looking at one right now on my leg.
Okay, whereabouts on your leg?
I'll see if I can get the camera down here without... It might be too dark, but... Can you see that? That mark there? Dark.
Yeah,
it's a circular. It's been there years, 20, 30 years.
Yeah, right.
Little red scoop mark. That's what it looks like.
Yeah. Well, what we think that is, I mean, it took me, a few years to come to this conclusion, but it seems to have to do with the implants. The extraterrestrial being sometimes will put a little object, what we call an implant, in the person. Now, before they do that, it seems, they take this little scoop of the person's flesh, and then they use that flesh to put around the little implant that subsequently they put in the person's body. And because it has the person's own flesh from the scoop of flesh, the body does not reject
it. Yeah.
implant. It really makes sense. And of the implants that have been removed, I've seen some of those personally right after being removed by Dr. Lear,
Dr. Lear, yeah,
and his team of surgeons. And so I've seen them, right then and there, right after they come out of the person. And they do always have some flesh-like substance around them, attached to them. And that's why the body has not rejected them. Yeah, so with people who have a scoop-shaped mark or any of these other things, or a little bump that they can feel under the skin, but they can't see it because the skin is over it. Anyway, people with those sorts of things, are highly likely to have been having these extraterrestrial encounters. Now, some people, of course, feel very creeped out by that idea. Oh, no, I don't want to have had those. But so many of the incidents that I regress people to, even though they're strange to us, they're different, but they're not necessarily harmful. In fact, in many cases, they're very useful and very benevolent to us. A lot of these beings, even the ones who look the most extremely different than we do, some of them still are very benevolent. And a lot of them are described by the people who experience them as being loving, unconditionally loving. And so there are beings out there, I'm sure that many of you have heard of them, that look like maybe taller, very attractive human beings, males and females. We humans tend to refer to them as the Nordics because they look very much like some of the Scandinavian people. Very often they'll have fairly long hair, and it might be blonde or it might be brunette. And they have, beautiful eyes and very classically beautiful features from our human point of view.
Yeah.
Sometimes wonder what we look like to the extraterrestrials, how strange we must look.
No one ever takes their perspective, do they?
No, but I did one time take their perspective. But anyway,
I want to hear that later on, by the way.
Okay, I'm sort of catching my breath on that one because I had an amazing experience one time myself where it seemed like I was an extraterrestrial, seeing an airport lounge full of human beings for the first time.
Well, let's put a pin in that one for later because that sounds amazing, and I'm going to write that down. Airport perspective, then that'll remind me.
Right. So, so there are many different types of beings. There are different sizes, different shapes, different looks. Some of them have hair. It seems like most of them don't. They have different skin textures, skin colors, skin types. Some of them seem to be wearing beautiful, long, flowing clothing. Some of them seem to have suits that are so form-fitting and tight to the bodies that it almost appears as if the being doesn't even have clothing on, especially if the suit is the same color as the skin, the people have to really look carefully. Does this have clothing on or not? Yeah. But anyway, there are many, many different types, sizes, and shapes, and different agendas. So probably each group has its own agenda, and another group will have its own agenda. And then many times people are seeing that there are a group of beings, different kinds of beings, in the same location, working on the same person. You'll have like little gray beings working with right alongside some taller white beings, and right there with a tall mantis being, and maybe some hybrids over there in the background. And they see those all at once cooperating and working together in regard to that person. And even in different rooms on one spacecraft, there can be different types of beings. And some of these beings, whether they're adult or not, seem to be hybrid beings, part human and part extraterrestrial. So that's been a big part of my work since about 2010, 2011, has been the hybrid program that many of these species have. And for a few years, I was mostly aware of the hybrid children that many humans were having. Men were having these experiences, and women. And so there's a big reproductive program going on by a number of different species. I don't know how many, but it has been quite a number.
So ultimately, the scope here then is immense. So we've got a shed load of people having experiences. We've got all experiences with a plethora of different types of beings and a plethora of different agendas. So the scope isn't a small thing. So anyone listening to this is a big phenomenon. And that in itself is mind-blowing. Now before I lead into bigger questions there, because there's a lot that brings up, can I just ask you about the process of regression?
Of regression?
Yeah. So what would you actually say it is? Where does it sit in the mind and the consciousness or what have you?
Well, first of all, it's a nice state of deep relaxation. Okay. There's a lot of misunderstanding, I think, by so many people, misunderstanding about hypnosis. And so many people, even this woman who came yesterday, had the impression that hypnosis means that you have to be out or under. In other words, totally not aware of what's going on during the hypnosis. And that is possible to achieve. But for most purposes for hypnosis, that is a very, very deep state that is not serviceable as much as the states of consciousness that are not as deep as that. So we have 4 major states of consciousness. They're actually states of brainwave activity. So right now, you and I are probably in the beta state of consciousness, brainwave activity, which means that we're awake, we're alert, we're able to pay attention, we're able to see things, be aware of things, we're conscious. We have the everyday consciousness. That's the beta state. And then we also experience very frequently, in fact, every day, we experience the next lower brainwave state, and that is what we call the alpha state. Now, this one is very familiar to all of you, as you will recognize, because It's that state of awareness that we're in when we're just waking up in the morning and when we're just going to sleep at night, or if we're going to have a nap, it's when we're just about to fall asleep, but we're not quite asleep yet, and we're not really fully conscious. And it's a state when we're just waking up from that nap, thinking, oh, yeah, I should get up. I don't want to. I should get up and function some more. So anyway, that is the alpha state. It's a very relaxed state. And then that state is perfectly good for regression. When you have some awareness of your surrounding and anything that might be going on there, and you're also in this very, very relaxed state, just coming out of that or going into that. And so that is, as I say, really just fine for hypnotic regression. You can also go into a somewhat deeper state and still function well in the regression. We call that the theta state of brainwave activity. So that's kind of the third one down.
Yeah, okay.
You're even more relaxed in a deeper state of consciousness, but you can still speak out loud. You see, in the process of regression, I name what we're going to be focusing on, finding out about in the regression, and then I do several minutes of relaxing suggestions, which the person lying there just follows and becomes more and more relaxed. And then I count from number 10 down to number 1. And I say that when you're down at number 1, you're back at that experience that you have been wondering about. And I mentioned the features of that experience. And you will be there as if it is now, and you will be reliving that experience moment by moment by moment as it unfolds. I've also said during the relaxation that the subconscious part of your mind has recorded absolutely everything that you have experienced in your life. And it has even recorded those things that may have happened that you were not consciously aware of. And that is important because that applies to these extraterrestrial experiences when the person might be consciously aware only for a moment or a very few moments, and then they're not consciously aware. But still, and I think it's very wonderful that this is so, that the subconscious part of the mind has been recording whatever has occurred, even if the person is no longer consciously aware of it. So that's why we can retrieve it.
Do you think that subconscious level is where people with eidetic or photographic memories access? They've got like a tunnel through to that location. That's why they remember everything.
I think probably so. Yeah. I do not experience that. I wish that I could, but
me too.
Yeah, I think it must be a simply wonderful ability. But that's probably where it's stored.
And when you're going down the steps, what stops a person then going to full sleep? Is that part of your process to stop them going to full sleep, or do they automatically stop before they go to sleep?
Yes, I don't even mention sleep at all. I just keep saying, just relaxing more and more. You're aware of my words, and you're relaxing more and more. And also, I tell people that it's very possible that they hear some outside noises in their environment. It might be a car, it might be a dog barking, a door opening, closing, whatever. And if they hear something like that, just let it go. Just know that has nothing to do with them, or this experience. And I also tell people that if during the regression they need to go to the bathroom, that it's better to tell me that rather
Yeah,
than
of course.
rather than to try to ignore it and be distracted by that. So I'll say, if you tell me that you need to have a bathroom break, then I'll say that's just fine. When you're ready, open your eyes and sit up and put your feet on the floor and get your bearings and stand up and go and take care of that. Come on back, lie down again, just as you were, and we will continue right from there. Or even if I have to take a break,
Sure.
I'll say, and I always tell the person this beforehand, say, I will tell you that I'll be gone for a couple of minutes, and you just keep on right with whatever is going on that you're aware of on the inside as you're lying there. And I'll tell you when I'm back, and you can tell me what you were aware of while I was gone, and we carry on from there. So I assure people that a bathroom break on either of our parts doesn't have to ruin the regression in any way at all. So people don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, take away the anxiety. And on that subject, it brings up a memory of mine, which is I told you earlier I had a weird period in my life which snapped me out of my old job and put me into a new one. At that point, I had hypnosis therapy, and I didn't ever think that I could get down to the level where your mind thinks you should go to be hypnotized, and open to things. How many people are like me that find themselves sort of like not going as deep as you probably would like, and how many people can go the full way?
Well, again, we're not talking about going down so deep that you're out of consciousness. That's not useful. I mean, that's okay to experience in life, but that's not useful for the regression process. Or even, I think, the hypnosis process, like many people used to come to me in my therapy practice for things like losing weight and quitting smoking, off drugs, or stopping their nail biting, or whatever habit they wanted to cease doing. And most of them, like I think most people, have come in with the big hesitation because they're not sure they can be hypnotized. And by that, they mean they're not sure that they can be out and under. They might be aware of something. And I say, in this hypnosis, I want you to be aware. I want you to hear my words. And I always created a whole script for those kinds of hypnosis where I was going to program in the suggestions that would be the most helpful for that person. It was all individually made. I never did the same hypnosis for anybody else. It's all very tailor-made.
Tailored, yeah.
Particular person. So I say, all that is necessary here is that you follow my relaxing suggestions and allow yourself to just get into a nice state of really relaxing, but you will be conscious and aware, and you will hear my words, and you will take in my words. That is the hypnosis. That is what will influence you. So that's usually a whole different concept than they had come in. And so many people, even for regressions, say, well, I don't know if I could be hypnotized, or I tried to be hypnotized once, but I didn't go under. And I say, good. You're actually not supposed to go under.
Yeah, but that's the sort of like perception we're given by those old TV. They used to do it quite a lot on TV, didn't they? Those old carnival tricks, so to speak, on TV.
Well, and I think it's still happening too. There's a place in Los Angeles called the Magic Castle.
Yes.
And I haven't been there for several years now, but I did go a few times. And one of the features there was that there would be a hypnotist, asking for people to come up from the audience, and he would hypnotize them and make them run around like a chicken or whatever.
It's always a chicken, I know.
Yeah. And what I learned from that, I actually met one of those musicians behind the scenes, said, I do a lot of hypnotherapy work. So I'm a fellow hypnotist, although I'd rather think of myself as a hypnotherapist rather than a hypnotist. I don't do it for entertainment purposes. But anyway, what I found out, and I also had this reinforced in some of the hypnosis courses that I took back in the early 1980s, that the hypnotist on the stage always does a patter beforehand, kind of warming the audience up and introducing himself and that sort of thing. And while he's doing that, he's looking at the people in the audience, especially those who are toward the front of the audience. He can see them pretty clearly. And he's looking at their eyes as he's doing his spiel. And he's noticing the people whose eyes sort of blink, close, maybe the head nods a little bit. In other words, they are the people who are very suggestible. So then when he asked for volunteers to come up on the stage, and a lot of people raise their hands, he chooses only those people whose eyes have looked like they are highly suggestible.
And this is what this person said to you, that was like the inside
the
scoop, so to speak. Yeah.
Said it had also been said in 2 separate hypnosis training classes I had been to. This is before I ever went into the regression training. And and there's total agreement among those people that that's what they do. They choose the people who have already indicated that they're very suggestible, very easy to sort of put into that relaxed state. And those are the ones that get to be chosen up on the stage. Some of the people who are really eager to go up on the stage and have that experience, their eyes are bright and open, so they don't get chosen.
Yeah. I'd like to be one of those people, but I know I think of myself as somebody who would struggle to be well received with it. Do you know what I mean? I don't know why. Maybe it's my logical brain keeping me out of it. I don't know. When you're doing your regression sessions, how is the information presented back to the patients? I.e., is it during the process they're remembering and can remember everything, or is it journaled by you? Is it videoed? Is it audio recorded? What do they get given?
Oh, you're really asking excellent practical questions, which many people wonder about, especially people who come for this kind of work. Well, first of all, because they're not out and they're not under, there's a little bit of consciousness there as they're going through the regression. They will remember most of it. However, I always encourage people to record the actual hypnosis regression session, record it on their own cell phone.
All right.
It's like all of our cell phones have some sort of recording feature.
Yeah.
Like a little microphone, or it might be called voice memos, or there are different names on different types of phones. But anyway, that's a very good way. Some people will bring in a video camera or even a friend. There's a man coming up in another week or so who insists on having his friend come with a video camera to video the session. So I let him know that that's okay with me, and that's happened sometimes before. But I don't particularly recommend it, because all the videotape would show would be the man just lying there. It would show him talking, and it might or might not, depending on its its hearing capabilities, might or not record his voice. So I suggest, as a better alternative, it's up to him, but to just voice record it on his tape recorder.
Yeah.
Then he can listen to it. And so almost everybody who comes to me has a cell phone with them. Sometimes they haven't brought their cord for charging the cell phone. They have an iPhone, they can borrow mine. Mine has been lent for the regression to many, many people. And then they can listen to that later if they wish to. But they will remember most of it. However, sometimes there's a detail or something that one of the extraterrestrials has said to the person in the regression, and that's really worth hearing again, because sometimes those messages from the other beings are really important to us. They're right to the point. And so far, whenever I have heard extraterrestrials giving information to the client in the regression, it's always been right to the point. In other words, they don't go elaborating on about things. They just say, we are doing this, or you are being taught this, or this is for this purpose, and they'll tell what it is. So it's very direct and very clear, and sometimes, as I say, very worth hearing again.
I think that's something to really explore, because a lot of the times in this field where you're talking about ufology and UAPs and all this, we flower around the subject and we try to work out what the agenda is, and everyone says something different, or a lot of the times there's different scenarios. So this regression business is almost like direct to the root of the agenda, is it not?
Yes.
Which makes you then think, why are more people not going this route to get to answers? Because it seems to me like I would want to go this route just to search for answers. Do you ever get people coming in who don't have UFO experiences that just want to find out if they have?
Oh, yes. And sometimes people come who have nothing to do with it. No, not even any little hints. It's a totally different focus. Like, what am I here to do in life? What is my main purpose? Or how can I get on a better track in life? I don't feel like I'm going anywhere, or much of it is much point. So there are more and more people coming for that reason. And then there are some people who think that they don't have any hints that they have had extraterrestrial experiences, but people in their family have. And so they wonder about themselves.
Yeah. Interesting.
And it does happen that it's a very, very typical thing that when one person in a family is having extraterrestrial encounters, probably somebody else, or more than one somebody else in that family, is having these experiences too. For instance, some of the beings like to follow a genetic line from one generation to another. So there might be one grandparent who's had these experiences, and then one in the next generation, let's say the person's parent, one of the parents. I mean, it could be more than one, but usually at least one. And then one in this generation of the person, maybe the person who comes, or maybe the sibling of the person who comes. And then if that person who comes has children, or the sibling has children, it might be in one of those children that they too are having extraterrestrial experiences. So in other words, the beings are following a genetic line in that particular family.
Yeah.
That seems to be very common.
Comes up a lot, that one, doesn't it? Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean that necessarily all types of extraterrestrials who have anything to do with human beings, doesn't mean that all of them follow a genetic line, but some of them do. So again, it's a matter of different types of beings and different agendas that they have. I also want to mention that we have been mostly talking about physical extraterrestrial beings and physical experiences, but it very frequently happens that other dimensional beings come. They may look like extraterrestrials. They may look like humans coming from a human other dimensional realm. But anyway, they come, and they can even take the person in the astral form of the person. And what that means is that they can take the essence of the person out of the body, leaving the body where it is. And the whole experience, which can seem like a full-bodied experience, happens to that person, that consciousness in the astral body, which is not physical.
Yes.
So we all have an astral body. We all are an astral body that also happens to have a physical body. So sometimes we're taken into other dimensional realms by other dimensional beings in our astral bodies. And those experiences seem just as real as the physical experiences. They're just as impactful. And even healing can happen to the astral body, and then that automatically affects the person's physical body. Now, I can believe this because way back in, I think it was 1997 or so, I went to a workshop one day taught by a man who was very, very sensitively able to feel the aura, the energy field, the astral body of each of us. And he taught us how to do that, how to be very sensitive in feeling the energy body around a person. And we were taught to use our hands an inch or so away from a partner's body and scan with our hands and detect where that person might have a pain or an injury or something, or even a past injury.
Yeah.
We could, all of us in the workshop, never having had experience or even having known about that before, we were all able to do that. So that was when I began to realize way back then in 1970s, 97 or so, that we have, in fact, we are this astral body. So we can not only pick up from the astral body anything amiss inside the physical body, but we can also heal. Like if somebody has a hurt shoulder, for instance, another person can go down, maybe we can even do it ourselves, go down through the aura of the body and emit heat from our hands and suggest to ourselves that we're emitting healing energy. And that will go through that little airspace, the aura, into the person's shoulder and give it some relief, or in some cases, even heal it.
And this is what we call Reiki, yeah? Is that, I assume that's what that is.
Reiki is,
yeah.
Yes, that's one of the methods of doing that. Absolutely. So the person receiving the Reiki healing doesn't feel any touch on their body, and they may or may not feel heat coming to them. But probably the energy really is coming through the aura, which they usually don't see, and into the body, helping the aura and the body. So anyway, I became accustomed way back then to, and this is way before thinking about extraterrestrials or knowing that they existed. But I got accustomed to our really being astral bodies in a physical body. And so that's why when these things started coming up in regressions, I could accept that. It made sense to me.
It's weird because, again, this is another synchronicity. The chap I spoke to earlier, I don't know if you've ever spoken to him, Mike Cleland, if you know the name, the guy who wrote Owls and the Synchronicity book, The
Leland.
Messengers. Mike Cleland, that's right.
Yes, yes, I know Mike.
He had that very story, which is he felt he had an experience out of body into a place where he was, conversing with extraterrestrials, and he felt as if he was downloaded as a astral projection into a Grey's body. And that wowed me because I'd not heard that before. So you're saying this, singing a similar tune essentially, that
Right.
happens. Yeah.
Well, I think it's entirely possible. I personally have not had that exact kind of thing come up in my work, but and Mike, I know him. He's a very nice man. He's very honest, forthright. And he, I know, had been very fascinated, concerned about these kinds of things because he'd had so many amazing hints in his life.
Yeah.
The owls being one of those many hints. And finally, he has become aware that he actually has had these experiences, which he had been suspecting for quite a while before he actually knew. Yeah, so I think that Mike is telling the truth, that he really has experienced the things that he says he has experienced. You see, it's just that most of us, I think, have gone through life not realizing some of these aspects, like the other dimensions and the astral self. For instance, when people have out of body experiences, those are also called astral experiences. That we, and I have had a number of those spontaneously, and that we just leave our bodies, our consciousness leaves our bodies, and we're out there, we're out totally somewhere else. I have been way out in space, hurtling along without my body, and it was very, very vivid. I've been out there twice now without anything around, not near the earth at all, and having amazing experiences, which just happened very spontaneously. And every time that I've had an out-of-body experience, I have been very, very relaxed. Like maybe for the first time ever, I was being massaged by professional massage therapist. So I was lying on a massage table, enjoying being massaged. This was back in 1968. And I had never heard of anything like this before. Astral travel.
Yes, you had no frame of reference then at that point.
No. And suddenly, I wasn't there anymore on the massage table. My body was, but I was out there flying over the Middle East, over the Suez Canal, looking down on the desert on both sides of the canal and the water. I was pretty high up. And it was so vivid. It was daytime. And it was so full of color and sunlight. And I mean, I really experienced moving along. And yet I didn't have my body with me. You know, that of course was really quite mystifying because I had never heard of that before that.
Yeah.
But there it was. It was happening. And then eventually the massage was over. And the woman said to my body lying there, okay, it's time to get up now. And that brought me back into my body. And when I sat up, I said, wow, I wasn't here. I was in the Middle East of the world. And she said, I know, I could tell you that you weren't in your body.
That was the
And
question I was going to ask for you. Did that person know that?
she did. Now, of course, she was older than I by, I don't know, 40 years maybe. And had had more experience in life in which she knew about that. She could recognize that my body was there. I was breathing, I was living, heart beating, but that I wasn't in my body.
Did she know that, or was she placating the, like, sort of like playing along with what you said? You know, I don't doubt her intentions, but
of course, I don't know, but I totally had the impression that she knew that.
which tells you she's had that experience a number of times.
Yeah. She said it's not unusual when you're very, very relaxed. And then in the other times when it happened, either it was when I was with a group of people chanting, like chanting the Om chant for quite a while. And then the next thing I knew, I was up and out of there. Or it was when I was like at a big retreat, a big gathering where they had either soft carpet to lie on or massage tables around the edge of the room. And I would be lying on one of those. And I always felt it happening the same way, that I don't know if this is true for other people, but that I'd feel myself, like my real self, the conscious self, sinking through the backside of my body, even though I would in many cases be lying on my back, but sinking out through the backside of my body and up and out. That's just how it happened to me. Other people I know have described leaving through the top of their head or through the solar plexus. But for whatever reason, I don't know why that is. I just happen to go out the back.
A quick question on that, right? When you were going through the back, could you see yourself going through yourself? As in, could you see like inside your physical body as you did it? Or was it just fast?
No, and it usually happened quite quickly.
Okay.
Just like moving through a doorway. You don't take very long moving through the doorway if the door is open. That's sort of a feeling, just sinking out, sinking down and out. Yeah. Oh, it's very pleasant. And then coming back again from these experiences, it seemed like I was coming back through the front side of my body rather than through the back side. Yeah. And I don't know why that is, but that's just the way that I consistently experienced it. So one time I was in an isolation tank up at a retreat center, Mount Madonna Center, Monterey, on a big hill above Monterey, California, looking out on the ocean. Beautiful place. And they had a little hut. And in the hut on that property was an isolation tank. So one day I signed up and I was there visiting and went into the isolation tank. And it was very, very relaxing because the air is the same temperature as the outside of my body. The water that you're floating in is the same temperature as the outside of the body. And it's completely black and thick walls. So there's absolutely no sound. So you're just floating in blackness, not touching anything. And because you're floating in a couple of feet of water, that's a lot of Epsom salt in it.
Salts, yeah, I was going to say, I wondered if it was.
The float is here, you're not touching the bottom, you're not touching anything with your hands, and it's completely black, which I found to be an exquisitely wonderful experience. I had never thought of being in blackness as being wonderful. If anything, being scary,
Yeah.
before. But this was just wonderful. I knew it was safe and it was enclosed. And about the third time that I visited that center and went into that isolation tank, I got so relaxed. Didn't happen the first two times, but the third time, so relaxed that the next thing I knew, I was out of there, and I didn't plan this, it just happened. I was out of there and I was way out in space with stars and planets at a distance all around me. I was hurtling through space. And at one point I thought, I should be freezing cold, and I'm not. And then I realized, oh, I don't have my body with me. No wonder I don't feel cold. And the consciousness, kept on going. And then eventually I could see that I was heading right toward a big planet. And I was going to crash into the planet at tremendously high speed. So for a moment, I just thought, oh, I'm going to crash. And then I thought, oh, it's okay because I don't have my body. And I went right through it, right through the planet and out the other side. Everything just fine because I didn't have my physical body with me. And so I was continuing on with those adventures. And then what brought my attention back to being in the isolation tank was that a friend who was with me was banging on the walls of this hut that this tank was in, saying, your time is up. Your hour is over. Somebody else is waiting to get into the tank. And that brought me back. I mean, she had to use a big rock in her hand to hit it against this hut to get my attention because it was a thick roof and walls of the hut. And anyway, that somehow brought me back into being in my body in the isolation tank. And then I could more clearly hear her and realize, okay, it's time for me to get out and let somebody else use the tank.
Yeah.
Otherwise, sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had continued going through space.
You would have just had a longer journey, wouldn't you? And at some stage, you would have had to have come back. The OBE scenario is something that's really fascinated me as well. And I'll be speaking to, I think it's Albert Taylor in a couple of weeks to talk about this whole thing. Again, it's another wonderful aspect of the paranormal, so to speak. Now, back to the regression stuff. When I mentioned earlier about the taping, have you ever had any patients that will consciously not remember everything that they later learn on the tape?
Yes, sometimes that happens. Usually they remember most of it, as I have said, but sometimes they'll remember some details from listening again to the regression. So when they listen to the regression, of course, they're just hearing, they're not seeing anything, they're hearing their own voice describing what they had been seeing. And that very often brings them back into sort of re-experiencing that experience. In other words, if they're in a room and there are a lot of little children over there and there's some tall other beings, and I've had them describe the beings and the clothing and the lighting and anything in the room. And as they hear themselves describing it in their own mind's eye, they can see it again.
Yeah.
From memory.
That gives me the next question, which is, do regression sessions fade, or is it a case of bringing what's hidden into our main conscious memory? So we're like bringing it up and keeping it there, or does it go back down again?
No, I think people tend to remember, or they'll remember the main features. I mean, even for years or decades, I can remember regressions that were done on me back in 1994 that I still remember the main features of very vividly. Just like I would remember other experiences that happened in 1984 in my here on Earth life.
Well, fair play to you for remembering things, because I might struggle to remember last week, let alone 84. Seriously.
Well, I can be more remiss about that too. But with these important happenings in our lives, or even in past lives, that really makes more of an impression, that at least on me, rather than what I had for lunch yesterday. I don't even remember what I had for lunch yesterday.
I don't remember what you had for lunch yesterday either. No
Oh,
idea.
yeah, I had lunch.
On the regression thing, would it be okay if we could, if you've got enough time, just to give us a couple of cases of regressions that stand out for you? You don't have to give names of the people if that helps, but like where somebody comes to you and then you're like blown away by it.
Oh, yeah, and there have been a lot of those. By the way, I have somebody coming in about
Okay.
6 months, so
Okay, we'll wrap this up then.
make it short because we're a bit over time here. So I think one of the ones that really impressed me the most was that man who went back to being a 7 or 8 month old fetus in his mother's womb and being healed by the extraterrestrial being. And then all that came out for a whole lifetime from that, continuing to have experiences with that particular being. And he became very friendly with that being. The being gave him his name, which happened to be Mazu, and they really developed a lifelong relationship. And this has happened with a number of other people too, that a being or a group of beings that they knew when they were very little children in this life, that they continue to know those very same beings. And as the person is growing older and continues to have experiences with them, the beings don't seem to grow older, which is very interesting. I mean, we see our fellow adults growing older and looking older, and but with many of those beings, they don't seem to show signs of aging. I don't know what that's about. I don't know whether they don't age or it just doesn't show on their skin or what, but that has happened a number of times. And as a person goes through life, also, they might start out in childhood with a particular being or group of beings. And then as they grow older, they begin to have experiences not only with those beings, but with other types of beings who have still different agendas. So it usually is not just one being or one group of being whom a person experiences through a whole lifetime. Although there may be that initial group that does continue through lifetime, and then others find him too and continue those experiences. It seems to me that once you have had experiences with one kind of being, it seems like, from our point of view, that the news gets out to other kinds of beings who are interested in humans and Earth, and then they may start visiting that same person. It just, that's the way it seems, rather than it all being planned from the very beginning.
Almost like a beacon goes up saying, this person's open.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And that happened to me. I'll just be very quick because I know I have somebody coming. That I had an experience in 1994 in England when I was doing crop circle research over there, and I was taken for the making of a crop circle. And then that, as far as I have any awareness, that was my first experience, which is not typical because most people start them very, very, very early. But in my case, it started, I was fully adult and in 1994. And I was taken for this very wonderful experience that I had asked for to be taken for the making of a crop circle. And then it was 3 years later that I and my car were taken from one of the Southern California freeways by a totally different group of beings, a totally different purpose. And then in 2003, I had an extraterrestrial visitor of a completely different type visit me in the afternoon when I was fully awake in my home. And then 2008, I was just drawn up out of the house in the daytime and taken to a very different group of beings who had a totally different purpose in mind, which was to congratulate me, appreciate me for having written the book Alien Experiences with my friend Nadine Lawlidge. And they knew about this from being way out there somehow in space. And they just kept saying, "We're so pleased that you have written this book with your friend. And the stories you have brought, we know they're true stories. And it's time for people on the earth to know about all of these experiences, know about all of the millions of different kinds of beings there are out here in space. It's time.
It is time.
Hey,
look.
That was in 2008, but even more and more with the congressional hearing and so forth. It is coming to be the time, and so many more people now are going to UFO conferences and talking about their ET experiences in the support groups. And it's more and more getting out and around. There are more and more books, more and more broadcasts about this subject. It's just really spreading out. And I think that the younger generations that may be just in their young adulthood now, they've just sort of grown up with the idea because of what's been on television and in the movies. And it's no big deal.
Correct.
For them. Some of them are very, very interested. Some of them are not particularly interested because it's just part of reality that they've gotten used to for a long, long time in their lives. And so I think that that's good. And then all of this is more officially coming out now. I think that that's very helpful. I just hope that it's not going to be presented to the public as a big threat that we have to fight against and develop a whole war industry to fight down shoot down UFOs, because I don't think that is called for in any way, and that there are so many of the beings that are neutral. I mean, they're not what we would consider good or bad. They're not doing anything to affect us or harm us. And there are many that are coming who are very benevolent. And I think it would be just a terrible thing if they were shot down when they're really caring about the earth and humanity and trying to help us.
Well, as with anything, I think the truth will out. And at some stage, the flood will come and it'll go the right way, because it's always on a path to positivity. Hey, look, we'll end it there. At some stage in the future, if you are open to it, I really want to talk to you about past lives, definitely the crop circles, plus a few other big topics. But obviously, I don't want to monopolize your time. So as and when you can would be good. But I do want to say thanks ever so much for coming on the podcast. It's much appreciated.
Oh, it's been a great pleasure. Nice to know you.
And you. Have a lovely rest of your day. To watch other episodes of KoitCast, or indeed animations I've made, click the image top middle. Click the image top left to download some of my songs, and click the image top right to subscribe to my channel. And make sure you tick that notification bell so you never miss an upload.